Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode, my sexy besties. This week, I am talking about a topic that I love to teach on that I think is not talked about often enough, which is the pleasure of actually saying no to sex and creating a culture of safety in your relationships, of being able to say no to sex, and even internally, your own consent, being able to say no as an act of honor to yourself. And this is very much inspired today by honestly one of the most beautiful moments that my partner Kellen gave me, maybe in our entire relationship, maybe some of the kindest, most beautiful things anyone's ever said to me in my life. And we are 5 years into our relationship at this point, and it just moved me so deeply. And I want to share this story with you because I think that there's a lot to learn in this particular interaction that he and I had together. So, the story goes, I had just come back from a weekend trip with my girlfriends in Tampa. And so Kellen and I had been away from one another, sort of that electricity of like, I miss you, you're alluring to me, was coming back for both of us. I could feel it through our text messages. And for context, before I flew to Tampa, I was in a very sad place. I was in a season where I was reckoning with depression and just overall feeling in a very winter mode. And so, for the couple of weeks before I left for this trip, we actually didn't have sex, and so it had been a little bit. And I was really excited to get back to him. My girls' weekend trip was like everything that I needed, the medicine of sisterhood to bring me back alive, and to go to somewhere warm. My friend lives in Tampa. Like, I was just feeling it. I was feeling myself turning back on. And so I was really looking forward to connecting with him. We were doing a little bit of like sexting while on my way back. And so we get home, and he comes home from work, and in general, he's someone who needs to like chat and like settle in from home, from a work day. And so it wasn't like, we were immediately all over each other, but I was really wanting to connect. And so but I will say I was a little bit disappointed, like when he got home, and it was kind of this very like asking me logistics type of energy that was coming from him. Obviously, he had just come home from work. He wasn't on vacation, so he's just in his normal day-to-day life. And I remember I stopped and was like, wait, can you look at me? I'm home. Like, kiss me with presents. And then after that, he took a shower, and when he came out, I was really like, okay, I want us to be present. I want us to be in our bodies. And so I asked him to do whatever he needs to do to get settled. And I was like, let's sit on the couch and actually catch up properly with presents. And I'm like touching him. I'm trying to be embodied. I light some candles. I'm low key setting the mood. And he's just not really giving me the vibes back. And so that was okay with me. But I think that there was just a lot of like unspoken, like I'm moving towards him. He's in a different space, kind of like missed, I guess, signals that were happening for me sexually that weren't really being said out loud. So fast forward a couple of hours, we've kind of had dinner, and I'm like, all right, maybe tonight's not the night. He's not really in that headspace. So I smoked a joint. I ate like a cup of noodles and like a bunch of tortilla chips, and we watched an episode of Game of Thrones. After which, I was feeling super tired. I had kind of assumed that our night was going to wind down. And to my surprise, when we get up to go to the bedroom, Kellen starts kind of like laying it on thick, right? He's showing me affection, wanting to make out with me, all of that. And I really wanted to be in it with him. Like, I truly did. So for a moment, I tried to just be like, relax. Okay, Anne, it's here now. But in my head, I was like, I'm tired. I feel kind of not great in my body after eating and smoking, and it just wasn't the vibe for me. And what I did was we got into bed. I was kind of trying to see, like, well, maybe if it's not sex, we can at least make out, we can have some fun. But in my whole body, I just kept feeling this feeling of like, no. And when I feel that feeling of no, I know that I have to honor it. And I have been doing work with my sexuality for long enough now where I also understand that it's a great question to investigate. Why is a no here? What is happening? And I realized it was really a lot of frustration that I was having, just about life and the context of life. So we had just been in a 2-week vacation to Italy where we had a ton of one-on-one time together. We had no worries, things were great. But ever since we had come back from the vacation, we had both been really busy. We were both traveling, and it just felt like and then I was dealing with the depression. So there wasn't really any time for us to be in anything other than more like partnership. You're my best friend. We're here for each other. We're supporting each other, which is a beautiful energy, but it is not the same energy as sexiness and excitement and spice and like erotic tension. And so I slowed down and I told Kellen all of this. I literally said out loud to him, not from a place of blame, not from a place of I'm wrong or you're wrong, but just really reflecting on how our lives together had been dominated by this energy, and how my desire was that I wanted us to be able to move more fluidly and more intentionally between times of partnership and being besties to times of having, flirtation and erotic friction with one another. And it was beautiful because, of course, he received it. But, being a woman and all the ways that I'm socialized, it still feels dangerous. It still feels scary in my body to say no. And I think that probably a lot of you that are listening can relate. We have all these stories of either trauma or that saying no means something about your relationship. It means that you're not into the person, or there's a level of guilt, like I owe this to this person. Like there's so much that we have around it. And Kel and I have talked about this about 1,000,000 times. But what was so beautiful was that he looked at me and he was like, babe, I want you to take so much pleasure in saying yes. And I want you to also always have the pleasure of saying no. And I mean, him just saying that almost like brought tears to my eyes. And of course, I was like, well, can you elaborate? Like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, I want it to feel so good for you to say no. And as he's saying this to me, we're laying in bed. He's holding me from behind. We're connected body to body. It's still sensual. It's still intimate. And just my whole body fills up with a sense of love, with a sense of like melting safety. And it was a moment, y'all. It was a moment. I'm sure that you can imagine, obviously, me being like the emotional person that I am. It was like, oh my God, this is the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Like, you are a king. Thank you. And I just want to share this story because there's so much in it that I think all of us can learn from. So I think one of the things in terms of sexual maturity and sexual empowerment that is really reflected just in the conversation that he and I had about our lives and what I brought up is that for so many of us, we have this expectation that sex should just be on and poppin' all the time, and that if sex is broken, it's almost like we put it in a vacuum and we forget to zoom out and think about, well, if we haven't been connecting, why haven't we been connecting? What has been happening? And if you're in a time in your life, in your partnership, where there's higher stress, where there's mental health things going on, where there's scheduling, all of that, more often than not, it's the outer context of what's happening in your life that is deeply informing and impacting your sex life and doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you and your partner. The second piece that I think is really beautiful about this is, the modeling of, okay, when these things are up, when I feel a no in my body, can you do the same thing that I did and think about what is a no in my body? What is the frustration? So many times, the no or the resistance or even the repulsion or the lack of attraction to a partner, or even just the boredom with our partner can come from things that are unsaid, things that are unresolved between the two of you. And so it's so important to think about what are the skeletons that are in the closet underneath that maybe I'm not naming or I'm not saying that are relevant to our relationship and the phase of relationship that we're in right now. And I think it's so important to clear that gunk out, because if you don't clear that gunk out, it's going to sit in your body and it's going to feel like resistance. And for a lot of people, it turns into this self-blame, or it turns into picking apart the relationship, when we all know the classic advice, communication is so, so, so key. And this also helps you to orient towards what season are you in as partners, and brings you into the story together. And so some advice that I have for bringing up those types of conversations is not to blame yourself, not to blame your partner, but to zoom out and really look at what's happening in our lives. What can I take responsibility for? Maybe what can you take responsibility for? And what can we take responsibility for in terms of how we respond? And so for us, the response was, whoa, we really need to be mindful about talking about logistics and calendars and all of that all of the time. And we actually planned a date night so that we could get time to just be with each other and drop in more deeply. And then the last nugget, of course, the most amazing gem, thank you to King Kellen, is really about that pleasure of saying no, creating safety in your relationship for either of you to say no at any given moment and to be really respected in it. I think that of all of the practices, of all the things that I teach for women or essentially non-men, but this applies to everybody, but you know what I mean, the dominant conditioning, there is a deep, 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 deep sense of safety that is needed to drop into the states of surrender and depth that is required in truly good, truly intimate, truly connective sex. And if your subconscious feels, if your body feels like there's any sort of force, like there's any sort of part of something sexual that is going against what is true for you, it will do what it wants to do, which is to protect you. And in a relationship, it is so, so important to know that your protection is really exalted, it's worshipped, and it's celebrated. And just in general, I think that this is such a culture that we're not used to. Consensual culture is not only an epidemic in the bedroom, but just everywhere, right? We find it very hard to say no. And I think one of the most beautiful things that we can do is to change this culture by finding the pleasure in our no, giving the pleasure of a no to our partners. And I'm going to leave you with an exercise that I actually learned from one of my teachers and mentors named Rachel Maddox at one of her retreats that I love to teach to my clients and on my retreats, which is a response to saying no. So it's a practice in creating safety for somebody's no. And what happens in this practice, what I tell my clients is usually sit down, have a conversation with your partner, and tell them for the next 2 weeks or the next week, we are going to do this practice. You can explain to them why and all of that good stuff. But the practice is for the next 2 weeks, we are going to encourage one another to say no to requests or things between the two of us that feel like a no. And the response when someone says no is to respond to them by saying, thank you for taking care of yourself. Thank you for taking care of yourself. And you can pair this with even practicing asking for consent. And consent isn't just in sex, it's energetic consent. It's, are you available for me to tell you about this crazy thing that happened in my workday? Are you available for me to process a fight that I'm having with a friend of mine? Are you available for me to talk through something that's going on at work? And Kellen and I practice this all the time, but it's so common for us to unload on our partner while they're shaving, right? Or honestly, trying to take a shit or like fold the laundry or something like that. And so practicing asking questions of, hey, can you take out the trash? Or hey, can you hold some space for me while I talk about this conflict that I'm having with someone that I love? And honoring if in the moment they're like, actually, no, I'm not available right now. No, I'm actually doing something else right now. No, I was actually about to, whatever it is, even no, I don't want to have that for dinner. To then be in a practice of responding to one another with, thank you for taking care of yourself. Thank you for taking care of yourself. I think it is one of the most beautiful, beautiful practices. And truly, 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 when you feel this amount of safety, when you feel this amount of honor in your body, after living in a culture and probably having a sexual history where this was nowhere near on the table, it will create so, so, so much beauty, so much safety, so much room for you to trust and to explore and to deepen with your partner. And if there's anything that you know about the way that I teach about sex, it's that sex is not just in the bedroom. It starts way outside of the bedroom, way before you get to the touching and the humping and the kissing and all of that. And it is a way that you practice intimacy in life and with each other. And so let me know if this helped. You can DM me on Instagram. And I hope that you take this practice to your partner. And I hope that this served you today. And I hope that you can, over the next week, maybe even if you're not necessarily practicing with your partner or anything like that, take some pleasure in saying no. I invite you this week to say no to something, at least one thing that really isn't true for you, and take a moment to relish in the joy of how good it feels to be true to yourself, to honor yourself. It is one of the biggest acts of self-love. And I love y'all. I hope this helped, and I will catch you in the next episode.